She didn't growl. She didn't pounce. The massive lioness stood in the middle of the dirt road, her golden eyes locked on the ranger's vehicle. Wide, glassy, trembling, not with rage but something far more haunting, desperation. The engine idled as dust settled around the Land Rover. Ranger Thomas Dubé froze with one hand still gripping the wheel. It was early morning, the kind of time when the bush felt like it was holding its breath, dew still clinging to the blades of elephant grass, and the low sun just beginning to paint the acacia trees gold. But this he'd never seen. A lioness standing her ground on the road was strange enough. But this one, she didn't move. She didn't snarl or flick her tail in warning. Instead, she lowered her head slightly, ears drawn back, not in aggression but something almost akin to sorrow. Her ribs jutted out beneath her hide, every breath visible. Her movements were labored and her eyes, those eyes. Thomas opened the door slowly. He knew better than to approach a lioness on foot. Any ranger with experience did. But something about her stillness, her refusal to leave even as he stepped out, told him this was no ordinary encounter. He kept his rifle slung across his back, but his hands didn't reach for it. "Easy now," he murmured as if trying to soothe the dry wind itself. The lioness took a single step forward. Thomas's heart thudded. She wasn't stalking him. She wasn't threatening him. Her head stayed low, eyes never leaving his. Then she did something that turned his blood to ice. She let out a soft, broken huff. Not a roar. Not a growl. But a whimper. It sounded like a cry. Thomas's fingers twitched at his side. This wasn't right. She should have run off or at the very least, warned him away from her territory. But this lioness seemed like she wanted him to follow her. Then she turned. Not rushed. Not bolted. But slowly, deliberately, she walked back into the tall brush, pausing once to glance over her shoulder. Thomas hesitated. You should call it in. Protocol was strict. No solo pursuits, especially not on foot. But his gut, honed by a decade of fieldwork and encounters with creatures in pain, was screaming at him to go. And so, without waiting for backup, he did. He kept his distance at first, watching the golden flash of her hide ahead as she weaved through the underbrush. She walked with purpose, occasionally stumbling. Her breathing was shallow. Something was wrong. Something more than hunger or injury. For nearly 15 minutes she led him deeper into the bushveld, farther than most rangers dared to tread alone. The air grew thick, buzzing with the faint hum of insects and the occasional squawk of a distant bird. Then the lioness stopped. They were in a small clearing surrounded by thorny shrubs and collapsed tree limbs. Thomas scanned the area cautiously. His eyes adjusted and then, his breath caught in his throat. Nestled beneath a rotting log, almost invisible in the dappled light, were two tiny cubs. No bigger than house cats, their fur still mottled with soft rosettes. They didn't move. One let out a faint cry. The other barely lifted its head. Oh my God. The lioness collapsed next to them, nuzzling the weakest one with her massive head. She let out another soft sound, half whine, half purr, but her body was failing her. Thomas could see it now clearly, deep cuts along her back legs, a torn shoulder, and what looked like an infected gash along her rib cage. Her strength had been spent. She had used her last reserves not to hunt, not to run, but to find help. Thomas's throat tightened. She wasn't just a mother, she was a fighter. And somehow she had known where to find him. It wasn't the first time locals whispered about animals sensing the good ones, but this felt like something out of a dream. He dropped to one knee, ignoring the thornbush digging into his leg. The cubs were severely dehydrated. Their bellies were sunken, gums pale. They wouldn't last another day without intervention. And their mother? She needed immediate medical attention. But would she let him take them? He pulled his radio from his vest. Base, this is Ranger Dubé. Emergency at Grid 14B. I need immediate wildlife rescue team, 2 cubs, 1 adult lioness. She's injured but not hostile. Repeat, not hostile. There was a crackle, then a voice. Copy that, Thomas. ETA 20 minutes. Hold position. He exhaled, looking back at the lioness. She didn't snarl. Didn't move. She just watched him, her eyes slowly blinking as if to say, please, help them. By the time the rescue team arrived, Thomas had already administered subcutaneous fluids from his emergency pack into the weakest cub. The lioness had let him, trusted him, even as her body trembled from exhaustion. The moment she was sedated for transport, something inside Thomas shattered. He gently ran a hand over her battered side, whispering, "You did good, Mama. You did so good." The lioness's chest rose and fell slowly as the sedative took hold. Her body, no longer taut with tension, finally relaxed into the safety of unconsciousness. Ranger Thomas Dubé stood over her with his sleeves rolled up, hands still shaking from the adrenaline and awe. She had trusted him. A fully grown apex predator, a mother, had walked out into the open, laid down every instinct and asked for help. Now, it was up to the team to make sure her courage wasn't in vain. The rescue unit's mobile vet, Dr. Ada Nguyen, was already on her knees by the lioness's side. Her brow furrowed in deep concentration as she assessed the wounds. "These cuts are days old," Ada murmured, running a gloved hand along the matted fur. "Could be from wire snares or a territorial fight. Infection set in, she's septic." Thomas nodded grimly. "She brought me here. Led me all this way with those injuries just to show me the cubs." Ada glanced at the two tiny bodies bundled in a soft transport crate nearby. One cub slept fitfully, limbs twitching from weakness. The other lay frighteningly still, a fragile thread of breath keeping it tethered to life. "She couldn't feed them anymore," Thomas added, crouching beside Ada. "Her milk's dried up. She hasn't eaten in who knows how long." Ada looked up, eyes softening. "She kept them alive longer than most would have managed. We're going to try everything." A portable stretcher was brought over, and together the team gently rolled the lioness onto it. Every movement was delicate, reverent, as though they all knew they weren't just handling an animal, but a mother who had defied every wild instinct to save her young. Thomas stayed close during the entire process, watching as the team loaded the lioness and her cubs into the vehicle. The cubs were placed in a climate-controlled container designed for neonatal wildlife. Heat pads and 4 lines were set up immediately, and Dr. Ada sat beside them, monitoring vitals as the convoy started the long drive back to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. The center wasn't far, just an hour through the winding bush roads, but it felt like an eternity. When they arrived, the team moved fast. The lioness was placed into a shaded recovery pen and hooked up to fluids and antibiotics. A cold mist fan whirred softly overhead to keep her temperature down as her body fought the infection. Meanwhile, the cubs were rushed into the neonatal intensive unit, an insulated room lined with incubators and soft lighting. Thomas stood behind the glass, his hands clasped together tightly as he watched Dr. Ada and her assistant work on the weaker cub. They inserted a feeding tube, adjusted its oxygen intake, and gently massaged its tiny limbs. "It's touch and go," Ada said through the intercom later that evening. "The stronger one has a chance. The smaller one, we'll see how the night goes." Thomas nodded silently. That night sleep didn't come. Thomas sat on a bench just outside the lioness's enclosure, sipping coffee gone cold, his radio crackling now and then with unrelated chatter. Occasionally he'd glance inside to see her chest still rising, slow but steady. "Why me?" he whispered to the dark. "How did you know to come find me?" The lioness stirred in her sleep, her paw twitching as if she were chasing some ghost through a dream. Maybe she didn't know it was him exactly. Maybe she just saw the ranger vehicle as a final shot in the dark. But he felt chosen. He remembered stories from his grandmother, tales of animals who spoke in dreams, who sought out those with hearts wide enough to understand them. Maybe they weren't just stories. By morning, the lioness had survived the critical night. She remained sedated, but her vitals had stabilized. Ada reported a mild reduction in the infection, though the fight was far from over. The cubs were in a more fragile state. The stronger one, whom the team had started calling Simba, had shown signs of slight improvement, feeding well through the tube and responding to gentle touch. But the smaller one, barely breathing the night before, had flatlined twice during the early hours of the morning. And yet, somehow, he was still holding on. They named him Dawn, because that's when his breathing had started to steady. Just as the sun began peeking through the trees, his tiny chest rose without intervention. "Little fighter," Ada said as Thomas leaned in to check on him. "Just like his mother." Thomas pressed his hand to the glass. Dawn twitched slightly, his paws barely visible in the folds of cloth. He looked more like a plush toy than a lion. Fragile. Breakable. But he was still here. Later that afternoon, Thomas walked into the lioness's pen for the first time since the sedation. She was awake, barely. Her eyes opened as he approached, groggy but alert. No growl. No movement. Just calm. He sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance, and placed a small bundle of soft fur on the blanket between them, a scrap of fabric with the scent of her cubs. She sniffed it once, then twice, and her eyes softened, really softened. The same eyes that had pleaded with him on the road now shimmered with something even deeper. Relief. Thomas spoke softly, not even sure why. "They're alive. Both of them." They're fighting just like you. She blinked slowly. It was a blink of trust. Outside the pen, Ada watched with quiet awe. You know, she said softly, I've treated over 100 big cats and I've never seen anything like this. Thomas turned. Like what? She didn't just tolerate you. She chose you. She brought you to her cubs. She could have died out there, but instead she used her last ounce of strength to bring you to them. You don't see that kind of intent every day. He looked back at the lioness. She wasn't just another rescue. She was something different. Something rare. She wasn't pleading anymore. She had hope. The morning sun glinted off the steel bars of the recovery pen as the lioness slowly lifted her head. Her body still trembled with weakness, but she had managed to sit upright for the first time since her rescue. Thomas stood silently by the enclosure's edge, holding his breath. It had been 3 days since she led him to her dying cubs. 3 days of around-the-clock care, whispered prayers and impossible hopes. The stronger cub, Simba, was gaining strength, feeding from a bottle now, even attempting to walk. But Dawn, the fragile runt, remained in a delicate state. Some days it seemed he might not make it through the hour. Other times he surprised them all. And through it all, the lioness had waited. Waited for updates. Waited for scents. Waited for the familiar cries of her babies she could no longer reach. Thomas stepped closer to the pen. He carried with him a piece of cloth from the incubator, fresh with the scent of both cubs, and knelt just outside the mesh. The lioness shifted her weight and sniffed the air. A low chuff escaped her throat. Not aggressive. Not fearful. Just longing. Her eyes followed the sound of every faint whimper drifting from the nearby medical ward. She knows, whispered Dr. Ada, who had just joined him. Even through walls and closed doors, she knows they're close. She hasn't taken her eyes off that building for more than a few minutes at a time, Thomas said, watching her. And she hasn't eaten properly, Ada added. It's like she's waiting for them before she lets herself recover. Thomas looked down at the worn lioness, her muscles tense despite the healing wounds. She's not going to fight for herself until she knows they're okay. Later that day an idea took root. Risky. Unusual. But maybe necessary. What if we let her see them? Thomas asked Ada. She blinked. You mean visually? Now. She won't eat. She barely sleeps. Maybe just seeing that they're alive will spark something in her. Just a few minutes. Behind glass. No contact. Controlled. Ada frowned, pacing slowly. It's not protocol. It's never been done. Neither has a lioness walking out of the wild to ask for help. This whole rescue is built on what's never been done. There was a long silence. Then a nod. Okay. But just for a few minutes. And if she shows any sign of distress, we end it. An hour later they wheeled the portable incubator to the edge of the recovery pen, just outside the mesh, shielded by transparent safety barriers. The lioness had been resting, but as the wheels squeaked and the familiar sound of her cubs' cries reached her ears, her head lifted fast. Then her body followed. She struggled to her feet, wobbling, staggering, but didn't fall. Every muscle in her body trembled as she inched toward the barrier. Her tail quivered behind her. Her eyes locked on the incubator like magnets. And then she saw them. Simba was alert, ears twitching, eyes open wide. He cried once, a high-pitched squeal that made the lioness press her face to the mesh. Then came the miracle. Dawn moved. His little paw stretched out toward the faint light, and for the first time in hours, he let out a mewling cry, small, broken, but alive. The lioness let out a low, rumbling chuff. Her tail swayed. Her nose pressed harder against the mesh. Tears welled in Thomas's eyes as he watched the connection unfold, mother to child, even across metal and glass. She didn't roar. She didn't panic. She simply watched, listened, and for the first time since her rescue, she lay down calmly. She's going to make it, Ada said softly later that night. She started drinking. Small amounts. But it's something. Thomas felt something lift from his shoulders. A quiet hope. They're feeding off each other's will to live, he said. Ada nodded. It's remarkable. They shouldn't have survived. Any of them. But they had. Over the next few days, small miracles became routine. Simba began toddling on his unsteady legs, earning cheers from the staff. He learned to suck from the bottle fully, eyes wide and curious. And Dawn, little Dawn, finally stabilized. His breathing regulated, his body grew warmer, and his eyes opened to reveal a soft, sleepy gaze. The lioness, whom they now named Amara, Swahili for grace, continued to improve. Her wounds responded to treatment, the swelling reduced and the fire in her eyes returned. But it was what she did on day 6 that stunned everyone. That morning, Thomas entered the facility early. Before the staff arrived. He needed a moment alone. A moment to breathe. As he walked past Amara's enclosure, he noticed something strange. The gate was open. His heart slammed against his ribs. She was gone. He burst into the corridor and looked around in panic. Doors were still sealed. No alarms had gone off. Then he heard it. A soft, guttural rumble from the observation window near the cub's room. He ran. And there she was. Amara was curled up just outside the observation glass, her massive frame relaxed, eyes half closed, watching her cubs sleep. She had broken nothing. Harmed no one. She had simply found them. Security footage later showed that a junior tech had accidentally left her pen's latch half closed during morning cleaning. Amara, far from bolting into the wild, had calmly nosed the gate open, walked down the corridor, and stopped at the one place her heart had been anchored since day one. Thomas didn't scold her. Didn't sound the alarm. He simply walked up beside her and sat. "You're not going anywhere without them, huh?" he whispered. Her eyes flicked toward him briefly, then back to the cubs. No, she wasn't. That evening, Ada made the decision official. "We're moving them together," she said. "In the same pen with safeguards. She's proven herself. The cubs are strong enough now. And she's more than proven she won't hurt them. Or us." The team gathered not just to oversee the process but because they had to see it. This wasn't just another step in a protocol. It was a reunion forged in fire, trust, and impossible odds. As Amara stepped into the new enclosure, freshly padded and temperature-controlled, the cubs were carried in gently and placed down on a soft bed of straw. For a moment she froze. Then she moved forward, slowly, reverently. Simba squealed first. Then Dawn followed with a soft gurgle. Amara lowered her massive head, sniffing, grooming, purring. She licked their heads one by one, tail swishing behind her. Thomas watched with his hand over his mouth. Amara lay down. The cubs climbed over her, into her, beside her, nuzzling into her warmth as though they had never been apart. Mother. Cubs. Together again. And alive. Amara didn't sleep the first night she was reunited with her cubs. Thomas stayed up too. He watched from the control room as the lioness curled around Simba and Dawn like a living fortress, her wide eyes glowing in the dim light, ever watchful, as if daring the world to try taking them from her again. Every time one of the cubs twitched or whimpered, her massive head would shift, tongue gently soothing them. Simba snuggled into her thick fur, while tiny Dawn pressed against her belly, his fragile body rising and falling with her every breath. "This is her healing," Ada whispered, watching beside Thomas. "Not the medicine. Not the IVs. Her purpose brought her back." In the weeks that followed, recovery blossomed like the dawn. Simba quickly became the bold one, chasing moths, pouncing on straw, and trying to climb up Amara's tail like it was a tree branch. He tumbled more often than he landed, but his determination never faltered. Dawn, though quieter, surprised them all. He had once been too weak to even lift his head. Now he stood on shaky legs and followed his brother's lead with wide, curious eyes. Every milestone, his first pounce, his first growl, was met with a gentle chuff of encouragement from Amara. And as her cubs thrived, so did she. Her coat grew sleek again. Her wounds closed into scars. The sadness in her eyes, once so heavy, now gave way to something new, something fierce and radiant. Hope. By day 40, the staff had to make a decision. Thomas gathered with the team in the meeting room, where the air was thick with quiet anticipation. "We've tracked her pride," said a young researcher, flipping through photos. "They're still in the southern ridge, same territory as before. There's no new dominant male, which is unusual. She might still be accepted if we reintroduce her soon." "But what about the cubs?" someone asked. "They're still so young." Ada leaned forward. "If she rejoins them alone, we risk separation. If we release her with the cubs, we risk rejection, or worse, retaliation from the pride. It's a gamble either way." All eyes turned to Thomas. He looked through the glass at Amara, who was dozing in the sun while Simba and Dawn clambered over her. "They beat every odd to stay together," he said softly. "We can't break that now. Not unless we're absolutely sure." And so the plan was formed. Over the next few weeks, a controlled soft-release zone was prepared near the southern ridge, close to where Amara had first emerged from the bush. It was a secure area, fenced in but vast, designed to ease animals back into the wild while monitoring their behavior. Camera traps were placed along the outer edges to track movement of the original pride. If there was even a hint of aggression near the area, they would delay the release. Thomas personally oversaw every detail. He owed her that much. Release day came with a gold-streaked sunrise. The team moved quietly and carefully. Amara, Simba, and Dawn were sedated just enough to keep them calm during transport. They were laid side by side in the padded trailer, and as the convoy rolled through the winding dirt roads, the bush seemed to hold its breath. When they arrived, the gate to the soft release zone creaked open. Thomas helped carry Simba and Dawn into the tall grass, where the scent of wild freedom lingered on every breeze. Amara was last. She stirred even before her paws touched the ground, her body tense but alert. Thomas knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're going home," he whispered. "You brought them to us. And now we're bringing you back." She blinked slowly. And then the gate closed behind her. The first few days were slow. Amara stayed near the cubs, never venturing far. She hunted cautiously, successfully taking down a small antelope on day 3. It was a strong sign. Her instincts were still razor-sharp. Simba and Dawn adapted to the grasses quickly. They played in the tall reeds, learned to listen for birds and stalk bugs like future kings of the savannah. Thomas visited the viewing post daily. Always watching. Always ready to intervene. But he never had to. Because Amara had everything under control. On day 12, the moment they had all waited and feared arrived. A camera trap captured 3 adult lionesses and 2 young males circling the edge of the release zone. The pride. Amara's pride. The footage was grainy but clear. They were sniffing the fence, vocalizing low chuffs. There was no sign of aggression. Only curiosity. The next morning, Amara lifted her head toward the breeze. Her ears twitched. Her nose twitched. Then she let out a single, echoing roar. The cubs froze, confused. Then she roared again. It wasn't a warning. It was a call. A homecoming. After 24 hours of observation, the decision was made. The fence would open. A narrow corridor led from the soft release zone into the heart of the pride's territory. Motion sensors and drones tracked everything. The entire rescue team held their breath as Amara stepped toward freedom. Simba padded after her first, then Dawn, his tiny frame now filled with defiance and spirit. They disappeared into the grass. 3 days passed. No alerts. No signals. No sign of struggle. Then, on the morning of day 16, a drone captured the miracle. Amara lay among the pride. One of the lionesses groomed her. Another batted playfully at Simba. Dawn climbed over a sleeping male's back like he'd lived there all his life. Not only had the pride accepted them, they had embraced them. The ranger station erupted into cheers. Thomas just smiled, his eyes full of quiet, exhausted joy. She had done it. They had all done it. Weeks later, Thomas returned to the ridge one last time. He stood with binoculars as the sun dipped behind the acacia trees. There, near the bend in the river, a familiar shape emerged from the bush. Amara. She stood tall and calm, her golden coat glowing in the fading light. Simba stood beside her, already growing into his paws, his stance bold and proud. And there was Dawn, still smaller but no longer frail. He stalked a beetle in the grass, ears perked, tail twitching with purpose. Thomas lowered his binoculars. She saw him. From that distance he couldn't be sure, but he swore she nodded. A silent thank you. A goodbye. And then she turned back into the wild, her cubs at her side, disappearing into the grass she was never meant to leave behind forever. She didn't come to attack. She came to plead. And because someone listened, she returned as a mother. She returned as a queen. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to Lion's Shield, where every roar tells a story of survival, love, and redemption.